Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. This is Kim Greenhouse. There is a national bestseller called Ship of Gold in the Deep Blue Sea, written by Gary Kinder. And I had heard about Ship of Gold for quite a while, about this 1857 disaster where the SS Central America went down and was lost, actually before the Titanic in 1912. And there was a young, I think 34-year-old engineer named Tommy Thompson in 1986 who raised $1.4 million to focus on locating and bringing up the SS Central America, which had huge amounts of gold on it. One of the reasons I thought it would be worthy of doing a show on this topic is not just the allure of treasure hunting, but the whole complex part of somebody who asks a lot of questions, has a desire to solve problems, and begins to put together thousands of people, 150 scientists, historians, and scholars, raises $12 million, and takes technology to the next level to find this ship of gold. Ladies and gentlemen, Gary Kinder is going to talk to us about that treasure ship, the actual adventure with Tommy Thompson, and what ended up happening with the ship, the gold, Tommy Thompson, and the complexity of this marine adventure. Ladies and gentlemen, Gary Kinder, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time.
Hi, Kim.
Thank you so much for being here. What a hugely complex, adventurous book that has so many different facets to it, from entrepreneurship to science to new technology to raising money, funding, and difficulty when you're doing new ventures. Talk about this ship of gold. Talk about the Columbia American Discovery Group and the SS Central America that was lost. Let's talk about the ship first.
Well, it was the greatest loss of life at sea in peacetime in American history. There were over 500 people died, 500 men. The Titanic, of course, was British. There were warships were sunk, American warships were sunk in World War II that had more people on board. But that was the biggest at peacetime disaster. It was a huge hurricane. This is something I love about writing nonfiction, is that you learn so much. You think you know a little bit about, for instance, the California Gold Rush, but I learned that I knew very little about it. And I didn't know that actually prior to the California Gold Rush, the government was realizing that there was an area way west of the United States called California, owned by Mexico, that we started to have a little interest in, and there was a war going on in 1847, 1848 with Mexico, and that we might end up acquiring that, and we were going to need to provide mail service. So some enterprising people, entrepreneurs themselves back then, went to the government and said, we will build these ships if you will help subsidize it, and we will run them and carry the U.S. mails back and forth. And the government agreed to do that as long as these ships could be converted to wartime vessels if necessary. So they were, the original architecture designed them to add cannons to them and things like that. But they were, at a time, it was a very short period, a very short window, but it was a time in history in marine architecture where we were between a sail and having steam powered. And so these ships were very large. They were approximately 300 feet on average. And they had full sail, but they also had these gigantic steam engines, run by coal. And they would run from New York down to Panama. The people would cross over the isthmus, pick up the Pacific steamer on the west coast, and take that up to San Francisco. And these ships ran just like an airplane. They ran every 2 weeks, just down and back, regular schedule. And this ship, the Central America, had picked up its passengers in Aspinwall, Panama, and ventured 4 days up to Havana, and then stayed overnight in the Havana harbor, and then lit out for New York. They had about 5 days left, and there were 500 passengers on board and about 100 crew. Out of the passengers, there were about 30 women and about 30 children. The rest were all men. Mostly miners coming back, some business people coming back from the gold rush. They also, these ships, besides carrying the U.S. mail, they carried a lot of gold. I think the Central America had something approximating $1.6, $1.7 million in gold. That was the value at the time, at $20 an ounce.
Wow. What people would do to have $20 an ounce now.
Oh, yeah. Wish you'd bought it back then. Your great-great-grandfather had. Yeah, it was quite, but this was on average. They would carry $1.5 million to $2 million in gold on these ships, and they were all marked. It's fascinating learning how they actually marked the gold and how they melted it down as it came in out of the Sierra Nevada, and created bars and established commerce by creating coins in small bars, and the bars were stamped and labeled and weighed and processed, and they were determined to be a certain fine. That's the percentage of gold in that bar. Very scientific back then and very accurate by assayers in San Francisco, and then they would load these on the ships, and then they would carry them across the isthmus, and eventually had a little train going across the isthmus and loaded up on the other ship. And so the Central America was carrying a lot of gold on it, and it hit a hurricane. Weather started getting kind of bad the first evening out, and then it was much worse the next day, and then it got really bad, and they were in the hurricane. In fact, the eye of the hurricane passed over them while they were in what's called the Atlantic Bight, which is that curvature that occurs along Georgia and the Carolinas. So the ship went down, and they battled the sinking for several days, and ultimately they succumbed, but got the women and children off at the height of the hurricane into lifeboats, and there was a battered ship nearby, and they were able to rescue the women and children. You would think they would take them to shore, but they were 200 miles out, which I've been out there while they were recovering the gold and doing some of their scientific experiments, and it's no man's land out there. 200 miles is way, way offshore. And so that's the only thing they could do was try to get the women and children off at the last minute, and it was just an act of mercy from somewhere that put this ship in that same channel within sight of the Central American. They got the women and children off. Eventually, some of the men survived it as well.
What a sad fall. I mean, that's a lot of loss of life.
Well, they were. It is. It was a huge. It was such a tragedy on so many different levels. The human loss was. You can imagine. A lot of these men on board had families, and back in Pennsylvania and Ohio and New York, Boston, and they hadn't seen these families. Some of them for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. They had gone west as 49ers, and most of them did not make anything. They barely made enough to stay alive out there. It was very expensive out there and hugely competitive. And some of these people, of course, had been farmers and ranchers, and they were tough. They were strong and strong-willed, and they discovered it was the hardest work they had ever done. Emotionally, it was tough too. They were out there alone. They would meet other people out there, of course. They were mostly other men that they could befriend, but it was tough. And so here they were returning home, and they were going to see their families, and within a few days, after several years, some of them had kids who were 5, 6, 7 years old. They hadn't even met yet. And to have all those lives lost, it was quite a tragedy, especially the heroism involved. I haven't even mentioned the biggest hero in the story, which is who was the captain, Captain William Herndon.